The live pictures on your screen right now, that is President Xi Jinping walking the red carpet, arriving there at the BRICS summit here.
You've traveled to places where others couldn't be, seen things others couldn't imagine, and heard stories you can't be sure whether to believe. They say that you're privileged, that people look up to you, but only you know how much effort you've made. You're on the ultimate journey to discover a country with 5,000 years of history and nearly 1.5 billion people. Is it a green countryside or a vast sea of neon lights and skyscrapers? Is it a dangerous land choked with smog or the blue sky of a summer's day? What is this China for you? And what is this China for the rest of the world? CGTN. See the difference.
Without question, the BRICS Summit this year will focus on trade and the economy. So let's get over to Michael Wong with some of today's business news.
Thanks, Jonathan. Let's first take a look at trade tensions across the Atlantic, where U.S. President Donald Trump took a pessimistic view on trade negotiations with European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, which is slated to begin later today. Now, President Trump on Tuesday called in a tweet for both economies to drop all tariffs, barriers, as well as subsidies. The U.S. president is also claiming that it was his tough stance on the threats of auto tariffs that brought the European leader to the bargaining table. Now, despite his claims, President Trump is facing increasing backlash as consumers, farmers, and businesses are all now starting to feel the heat from counter duties levied by China, Canada, as well as by the European Union. So, European Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker also dampened his expectations ahead of trade talks with President Trump. Juncker told German public broadcaster ZDF that his visit to the U.S. is to explain the EU's position on trade and explore ways to avoid a trade war. Juncker also renewed his pledge of retaliation should Trump slap new tariffs on EU car imports. Concerns about transatlantic ties rose significantly after the EU hit back against U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs by imposing duties on over $3 billion worth of American goods. Now, if the U.S. proceeds with tariffs on auto imports from Europe, the EU is standing ready to counter. The European Commission is drawing up a list of $20 billion worth of U.S. goods to hit with duties. European Union Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmström said on Tuesday that the decision would be necessary if no other solutions were left. Malmström said the next potential round of EU tariffs would not target specific U.S. states. She said more general goods such as agricultural, machinery, high-tech, and other products would be targeted instead. Well, there are few winners in a trade war, and nearly all countries stand to lose. But in the short term, some nations are seeing opportunity amid the ongoing conflict between China and the United States. Brazil is one of them. Paulo Cabral has more on the business outlook from São Paulo.
There is growing Chinese demand for Brazilian soybeans, and the price of the crop has risen steeply since May. It's a clear result here of the trade conflict between China and the United States. As China pulls business from the US, it picks up in trade with others, in this case, the world's largest exporter of soybeans, Brazil. And there's hope among other Brazilian food producers that China will turn to them too to supplement their needs. The seafood industry is key among them.
Of course, a big trade dispute like this between China and the United States can create opportunities for Brazil. At first, we see an increase in the potential of exporting lobster to the Chinese market. Brazil and the United States were disputing this market in China. Since now the American products will be more expensive because of the taxes, we'll have an advantage.
According to a recent study by Brazil's National Industry Confederation, the country could see an additional $7.4 billion a year through increased exports to both countries as a result of tariffs imposed so far, and more threatened. Increased sales to China likely include soybeans, pork and seafood, and Brazilian manufacturers say they see a potential U.S. market for some of the cars, auto parts and machinery previously sourced in China.
We estimate a potential that the trade conflict will open up a potential market for our sector of $13 billion. Companies that are already exporting to the U.S. may be able to use this moment to boost their sales. But for those who are not yet in the export market, it's much harder because it's not easy to develop new clients abroad for our products.
While there are clear opportunities for Brazil to profit in the short term as a result of the trade conflict between China and the United States, there is also concern here about its wider impact on the global economy. And that could ultimately work against Brazil and most other nations too.
We have to acknowledge that there's a very negative aspect to this trade war. It will compromise world economic growth. Some countries may feel a benefit now, but if we look at the overall situation, at some point there will be a general reduction in world output, and this could lead to price increases and even inflation.
China and the United States are by far the two largest economies in the world. Any decisions they make are bound to deeply impact the global economy. For now, Brazil may benefit from their conflict, but the long-term consequences are much more uncertain. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, São Paulo.
And results from a closely watched survey of German industry leaders showed Wednesday that business confidence fell slightly for the month of July. Trade war fears weighed on the outlook for the German economy, though early indicators suggest that growth may have recovered slightly between April and June. Now, levels of German business and investor confidence have both dropped in recent months. That's as companies in Europe's largest economy weathered a growth slowdown in the first quarter of this year. Well, China is vowing to prevent large-scale job losses as trade frictions with the United States create uncertainty in the domestic labor market. China's National Development and Reform Commission says it will work to keep the unemployment rate below official thresholds. The agency also plans to step up its monitoring of joblessness and provide incentives for migrant workers to return to their hometowns as a way of spurring investment. Now, China wants to keep urban unemployment below 5.5% this year, while keeping the registered unemployment rate, another official gauge, below 4.5%. Well, the Trump administration often says that America is losing on trade to China, but experts say that's a huge miscalculation in a highly globalized world. They point out that it's actually U.S. companies which rake in the lion's share of profits.
Migrating production lines to China and then ship the products out to other countries or back to the United States. That's how American companies cut costs and boost profits over the years. But that's all counted as China's exports that lead up to a big literal trade surplus. In that trade model, China makes only a small portion from processing and packaging.
Foreign invested companies here, including American businesses, have been contributing more than half of China's trade surplus with other countries. Even as much as 84% in 2011, the percentage dropped in recent years, but still about 50%. Domestic companies actually profit less from countries' trade surplus.
The Trump administration also neglected American companies' revenues made from Chinese markets, which are not calculated in the trade numbers. Last year, General Motors sold over 4 million cars in China, along with its joint venture. The company's sales in the Chinese mainland increased by 12% to take up 42% of the total in the third quarter, while in the U.S., revenues declined by 20%.
President Trump lowered taxes to lure businesses back to the U.S. to create jobs and boost GDP. That way of thinking overlooked the fact that nowadays companies' investments overseas can often get higher returns thanks to globalization and rapidly growing demand in emerging economies such as China.
There is no doubt that Chinese markets remain rather attractive. American investors set up 355 new companies in China in the first quarter alone. That's 44% more than a year ago. Tracy Chang, CGTN.
Now, if you recall, we saw a brief respite in China-U.S. trade tensions in May as both sides seemingly were near agreement on a trade deal, but the U.S. backtracked a few weeks later by still pushing ahead with tariffs on Chinese goods. Recently, the U.S. pointed out that China and its other major trading partners should take full responsibility to resolve the trade dispute. So what is the underlying reason behind the trade war provoked by the U.S., and who should ultimately take responsibility in resolving this dispute? Natasha Hussein looks for answers.
I view them as the trade war spurred by tariffs introduced by U.S. President Donald Trump aims to narrow the trade deficit with China. It looks to reduce the impact of the deficit on things like jobs and economic growth. In fact, the tariff policy is largely aimed at China's high-tech products in order to indirectly suppress the development of China's science and technology sector.
According to a White House report from last month entitled How China's Economic Aggression Threatens the Technologies and Intellectual Property of the United States and the World, and the Export Restrictions of the American Military and Civilian Dual-Use Technology Products to China, it demonstrates the U.S.'s vigilance over Chinese technology development.
Moreover, two significant American strategy reports from the end of 2017 clearly identify the U.S. treats China as its top rival. And through the suppression of China's emerging technology development sector via the trade war, the expert pointed out that the U.S. can maintain its dominance and leading role in the world. However, after provoking the trade war, the U.S. has been declaring itself as a victim and passing the buck of resolving trade issues to its major trading partners, such as China. But in fact, the U.S. has been taking advantage of the international status of the dollar to attract foreign capital for developing its economy for a long time, enjoying low-priced goods as well. U.S. companies make $200 billion to $300 billion per year in China.
Since China and the U.S. have different economic structures and development, there cannot be complete equality on trade between the two sides. The U.S. as a consumer country has a low rate of savings, thus the macroeconomic structure has been gradually making itself a trade deficit country. For China, it has been looking internally to fix issues since the start of the trade friction, and it also keeps further opening up worldwide and easing accession for foreign investment for the globalization of trade. Now the U.S. should take responsibility because trade issues cannot be resolved without improving its own economic structure and strategic objectives.
As China's exports are highly alternative and some products are dependent on the U.S. market, it is clear that Trump is very confident about his trade war. However, a Chinese economist said that China has ample domestic demand and a huge market, plus the rising cost of industrial raw materials will make U.S. companies' investment increase in China, just like Tesla's recently announced plans to build a factory in Shanghai. So China does have the confidence to deal with the trade war on its end.
The trade war will eventually push up the cost of U.S. industrial production and consumer spending, risking inflation and negatively impacting U.S. economic growth. Now, some American business communities are aware of this.
Dr. Zhu pointed out that economic globalization is driven by the general trend, and recently there was a letter signed by more than 1,000 U.S. economists opposing Trump's trade policy. And some chambers of commerce and local governments are also beginning to take action.
The American Chamber of Commerce and our organization have a two-track dialogue mechanism now. And there are also some local multi-level communication activities between China and the U.S.
With a look to the past, U.S. President Herbert Hoover's Trade Safeguarding Act in 1930 led to the collapse of America's multilateral trading system. There is never a winner in a trade war, and only when the two sides carry out sincere negotiations and communication can loss be avoided on both sides. Natasha Hussein, CGTN.
Well, Latin America's trade bloc, the Pacific Alliance, is also making moves on the trade front. It's holding a week-long summit. Messages about free trade and regional integration are being sent as U.S. protectionism has created growing concerns. Our Frank Contreras is in Mexico City with this report.
The Pacific Alliance Summit is taking place this week in Mexico's resort town of Puerto Vallarta. Against the backdrop of growing U.S. protectionism, the leaders of Colombia, Peru, Chile, and host nation Mexico agreed to broaden their commitment with the Mercosur bloc.
The Alliance of the Pacific and Mercosur approved this day a joint declaration in which we endorse a commitment to free trade that favors social inclusion. We agreed to explore new cooperation routes to explore our economic and commercial relationship in areas of common interest.
Presidents of the Pacific Alliance nations underscored the importance of building strong ties among Latin American economies.
Integration in all senses, and this ratification of this concept has been so good for the Pacific Alliance. But at the same time, we have to unite the presidency of the presidents of the Americas.
Chile's president is concerned that U.S. trade policies under President Donald Trump are interrupting global free trade.
Protectionism. If the warnings of President Trump, as Venezuelan President Maduro says, we say, Trump, the threats were fulfilled. Duties could go to the levels of the 1970s. We're not talking about some distant hypothesis. We are talking about what is happening today in front of our eyes.
Those gathered seek to expand tourism in Latin America, build more sea and airports to transport merchandise built or assembled in the region, and discuss immigration issues. The Pacific Alliance was formed in 2011 and is one of the world's largest regional trading groups. The Mercosur bloc, comprised of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, along with the Pacific Alliance, agreed on Tuesday to find new ways to work more closely together. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Singapore all joined as associate members of the Pacific Alliance last year. Another nation, South Korea, is also expressing interest. But member nations of the newly conformed Pacific Alliance face challenges. They're gathering just at a time of growing nationalism when the world's largest economy, the United States, is threatening to raise tariffs and end trade pacts. Frank Contreras, CGTN, Mexico City.
Well, President Trump has told Mexico's President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador that a quick renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement would bring more jobs and higher wages for both countries. In a letter on Tuesday, Trump said he was looking forward to working closely together to build what he's calling a great relationship, mentioning trade, security, and migration. It's the latest step in a potential thaw between the two neighbors since López Obrador's landslide victory. The U.S.-Mexico relationship, of course, has been rocky after a tense 18 months between Trump and outgoing President Enrique Peña Nieto. The president-elect wrote Trump a 7-page letter earlier this month, signing off that both men had managed to, in his words, displace the establishment. Trump said he expected to get something worked out on NAFTA and that he was prepared to address economic and security issues that drive migration to the United States. While the Trump administration on Tuesday announced $12 billion in aid for farmers who have been the primary targets of tariff retaliation, as our Owen Fairclough explains, this is the first acknowledgement by Washington that aggressive trade actions are bouncing back to hurt the American economy.
Farmers in the rural Midwest of America were critical in helping to put Donald Trump in the White House, but they're hurting in this global trade war. The U.S. government estimates that U.S. farmers have lost some $11 billion as a result of China applying retaliatory tariffs on the kinds of products they export to China. We're talking about soybeans, pork, all the kind of products that have been feeding China's growing appetite. Those tariffs put in place by China in retaliation for the Trump administration applying tariffs on China to try and change what it alleges are unfair trade practices. So the farmers have been hurting, but they're now in line for some $12 billion in emergency funding.
This $12 billion, which was announced today by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, this is only short term. So what concerns me is they have made this announcement and the details are not yet clear. They probably won't be clear.
All right, let's head back to the BRICS Summit where the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, is speaking live. I'm going to hand it back to my colleague, Jonathan Betts. Jonathan.
Gaining momentum and meaning in areas such as finance, agriculture, trade, combating transnational crime, science and technology, health, education, security and academic dialogue. One of the most important achievements, and there have been many, many achievements that we can talk about as the BRICS family, has been in the first decade of BRICS, was the establishment of the new development bank, which fills a critical gap in project funding. But the establishment of this BRICS Business Council, as Minister Davis has said, has also been an outstanding achievement. To be able to get so many business people from all the BRICS countries, including some outreach countries that we invite to the BRICS Summit, is quite phenomenal. And for this, we count it as an outstanding achievement. And indeed, the other important achievement which Minister Davis also highlights is to have set up a forum of a number of countries that we call outreach countries that are part of the BRICS Summit. And this year, these will also be accompanied by a number of countries in our own region who will be participating in the outreach activities. This also is an important achievement.
So right there, we were just hearing the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, speaking and addressing business and industry leaders at the BRICS Business Forum. And we're going to have a series of leaders from the BRICS nations speaking throughout the evening. So stay tuned with us as we get live speeches from them coming up ahead. But first, back to trade, where U.S. newspapers have taken a hit from a shift to digital news and a sharp loss of advertising. But a round of tariffs on Canadian newsprint is pushing some publications to the brink. The U.S. Commerce Department earlier this year slapped preliminary tariffs of up to 30% on newsprint from Canada, the largest source for U.S. newspapers, in response to a complaint from Washington state-based North Pacific paper. Now, tariffs have heightened the economic woes for the U.S. industry, notably for small dailies and weeklies facing the prospect of belt tightening that may include cutting back print editions or slashing staff. Also, U.S. motorcycle maker Harley-Davidson reported a 6.4% drop in second quarter profits. Its overall retail sales fell 3.6% year-on-year to 78,000 vehicles. A breakdown of the data shows that sales in the U.S. market was down over 6%, while revenues overseas picked up 0.7%. The company also trimmed its 2018 profit margin to a range of 9 to 10%, given the expected impact of tariffs. The European Union has slapped an additional 25% tariff on Harley-Davidson in retaliation against President Donald Trump's tariffs on EU steel and aluminum. The company decided in June to move the production of motorcycles destined for Europe to factories outside the United States. Well, among the U.S. states that could be hardest hit by tariffs is Louisiana. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, more than 500,000 Louisiana jobs are supported by global trade. As our Hendrik Sabrani explains, ports along the Mississippi River in particular could feel a very big impact.
The port of South Louisiana, just west of New Orleans, is America's largest tonnage port. 280 million metric tons of cargo were handled here just last year.
I like to say that we're probably one of the most important ports that nobody ever heard of.
Port Director Paul O'Quinn sees storm clouds gathering over this stretch of the Mississippi River, where so much of America's business is done. tariffs have been imposed, more are threatened, but their effects haven't been felt here just yet.
It has caused a lot of uncertainty. Everyone's a little unsure about what the future holds.
An hour's drive away south of New Orleans, the future has arrived at Elite Energy. U.S. steel tariffs have made the material these workers use to manufacture hydraulic fracturing equipment 25% more expensive.
Yes, we've had to raise prices to keep up and to make our margins that we need to make. I'm not happy about it. You know, it's affected us negatively, I guess.
Certainly, I can tell you that it's created a lot of nervousness.
International trade lawyer Eddie Hayes says Louisiana, with its long import and export history, could be hit hard by U.S. tariffs and other countries' retaliatory measures. The Port of South Louisiana ships and receives cargo from more than 90 countries around the world. China is one of the top 5 import nations. China is also one of the top 5 commodity destinations. $5.7 billion worth of Louisiana exports to China are targeted for retaliation, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. That includes grain, crude oil, and petrochemicals.
When you have tariffs and the tariffs go into effect and people buy less grain, that's less tonnage. Less tonnage to us means less jobs. It's just that simple.
30,000 people work for Oquan's port or for one of the 67 companies located within the port district. He says $23 million in future job-generating port projects could also be affected as the price of steel goes up. Steel tariffs have already hurt one food service equipment manufacturer that was in New Orleans for a recent convention.
We're just seeing so many barriers. The cost for us to do business, we're almost getting completely thrown out of the market in Canada.
WGSO. Here in Louisiana, which backed President Trump in 2016, there are mixed feelings about the current trade disputes.
We have a lot of conservative businessmen and women down here in Louisiana. We voted heavily in favor of Trump as a community, and you see a lot of uneasiness in their facial expressions and in their discussions.
Some blame China for the situation.
So I think that's given them a little bit of a lifeline for now.
One businessman who's feeling the pinch argues the tariffs were imposed too quickly.
I don't think it can keep going too much longer like this, but we'll see.
Many believe political pressure from places like Louisiana will eventually force the U.S. and its trade partners to hammer out a solution. That's the hope, anyway, in this trade-dependent area where the future looks murky at the moment.
It is like a big cloud hanging over the area, and we just want the sun to peek through and make things rosy again.
Hendrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Reserve, Louisiana.
Well, the International Monetary Fund says that China's RMB is in line with economic fundamentals, but that the U.S. dollar is overvalued. The IMF's comments came as Washington accused both the European Union and China of keeping their currencies artificially weak. Now, China's RMB has taken a hit from U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods, while the Federal Reserve's rate hikes have also added to RMB pressure as rate differentials rise. The IMF also says that nearly half of global current account surpluses or deficits are excessive and concentrated in advanced economies, which adds to risks in growth and aggravate trade tensions further. Well, on the corporate front, the number of firms going public on the Chinese mainland and Hong Kong stock markets have shown a slow but stable growth in the first half of this year. A recent survey shows that Chinese companies are still quite optimistic in their pursuit of stock market listings. Mi Jiayi explains.
In the first 6 months this year, the A-share market saw 63 companies launch IPOs, raising a total of 93.1 billion yuan. That's much lower than the same period last year. But while the recent listing of tech giant Xiaomi on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange got a muted reception, the success of the listing and the possibilities raised by the new CDR funds have boosted companies' enthusiasm for seeking IPOs in the second half of the year. According to an EY survey of middle-sized Chinese companies, more than 3/4 are planning IPOs.
We think that among the companies that are pursuing IPOs, 2 types will get market recognition. One is companies in the new economy, including TMT companies and unicorns. The other is biotech firms. We estimate there will be big breakthroughs in the biotech industry in the next decade or 2.
But there are also challenges to corporate growth. The EY report says more than half of the Chinese companies surveyed say their biggest challenge to growth is insufficient cash flow. Ho says that as the government continues deleveraging the market, companies will face rising costs of financing operations. That, of course, means they will be more anxious to gain the financing that a market listing would bring. Still, the approval rate has remained low since the end of 2017, and though analysts say it might pick up slightly in the second half, they don't expect it to pick up much.
We can see
that in the equity financing process, the approval rate has changed from almost a dozen companies listing every week last year to only 2 or 3 companies approved every week this year. That's largely to do with the market capacity. In the process of deleveraging, companies are expected to change their ways of financing from indirect to direct, which means fewer loans from the banks and more from the equity market and bond market. But if you look at the market capacity, there's no way we can return to that fast approval rate of last year.
Tsai says stricter regulation of the stock market is another reason for the low approval speed, but that will lead to higher quality IPOs in the A-share market. In the first 6 months, the average capital raised by an IPO on the A-share market was the highest in a decade, close to 1.5 billion yuan per company. Mi Jiayi, ICS4 CGTN, Shanghai.
Well, Facebook has opened a subsidiary in the Chinese mainland. It's a long-awaited step for the social networking giant and its Mandarin-speaking founder Mark Zuckerberg. The company here in China is called Lianshu Science and Technology. Now, in Chinese, Lianshu literally means face and book. It was established on July 18th in Hangzhou with $30 million of registered capital. Now, Facebook's Hong Kong branch holds all of its shares. Corporate filings show the subsidiary will engage in the development of network IT, technology services, and consulting services, among other businesses. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka, said Tuesday that she was closing down her fashion line to focus on her role as an informal White House advisor. The move came after mounting criticism of the Trump family over conflicts of interest. According to the Wall Street Journal, online sales of Ivanka Trump's brand fell nearly 55% in the 12 months to June compared to the same period a year earlier. And that's all on my end. It's back to the BRICS Summit with Jonathan Betts. Jonathan.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. And a reminder, you're watching extended continuous coverage on CGTN of the BRICS Business Forum underway right now in Johannesburg, South Africa. Stay with us. China is strengthening its manufacturing abilities to export better automobile products to Africa. Some brands are gaining popularity in active markets such as South Africa. CGTN's Zhao Yunfei finds out more from a vehicle production line near Beijing.
Chinese car brands continue to win trust and gain popularity among domestic consumers. Now, moving forward, companies such as Beijing Automobile Works, or BAW, are investing in South Africa.
We are using South Africa as a jumpstart to explore the entire African market. Sales in South Africa are good. The demand there is higher than supply.
Meng Wei says the cross-country vehicles they've made are designed specifically for South African drivers. From road conditions to driving habits, many perspectives are considered. Minibuses can be found almost everywhere on the streets of South Africa. 3,000 of them are BAW cars, thanks to the stability of China-made engines. They're not pricey and can endure low-quality gasoline. Small components are produced here on a production line just outside of Beijing. Usually, these are the units with core technology. From here, they will get shipped to a factory in South Africa. Local workers there will assemble the entire vehicle.
Among the 280 staff members at our factory in Johannesburg, most of them are local workers. The majority of the administration team is hired locally. 10 of them are dispatched from Beijing. 100% of these workers are local people.
The trade volume between China and South Africa has grown drastically over the past 2 decades. Yao Jianyong says.
And we're going to do that story because we have some news happening right now at this hour. We want to go live now to Johannesburg, where Chinese President Xi Jinping is just about to address the gathering there. Of course, this is a big moment for the BRICS summit. Brazil, Russia, India, China. We just heard from the South African leader, Cyril Ramaphosa. All the leaders are speaking at this summit, the 10th to be held after being founded 10 years ago. There's the Chinese president at the podium right now. Let's listen in.
Your Excellency President Ramaphosa, Your Excellency Faure, President of Togo, Your Excellency Vice President Mabuza, Ministers, friends from the business community, ladies and gentlemen, friends, good afternoon. I am delighted to visit South Africa, the Rainbow Nation, once again, and meet you here in the beautiful city of Johannesburg. 5 years ago, I took office as the Chinese president, and the first international summit I attended was the 5th BRICS summit held in Durban. And 3 years ago, right here in this convention center, together with African leaders, I attended the FOCAG Johannesburg summit. Well, 3 years on, I once again set foot on the African continent, and I was greatly struck by the robust growth and strong vitality of this piece of land. In September 2017, thanks to the strong support of all participating parties, China successfully hosted the BRICS Xiamen Summit. We, as BRICS leaders, agreed unanimously to strengthen our strategic partnership, consolidate the cooperation architecture with its 3 main drivers, namely economic cooperation, political and security cooperation, and people-to-people exchanges. We thus laid out a vision of BRICS Plus cooperation, and we jointly ushered in the second golden decade of BRICS cooperation. I understand that in the Nguni language, Johannesburg means the place of gold. In this sense, we just cannot find a better place to chart the course for our golden decade than in this city of gold. Here in Johannesburg, I look forward to working with other BRICS leaders to embark on a new journey of BRICS cooperation and fulfill our new mission. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, the BRICS mechanism owes its birth and growth to the evolution of the global economy and the changing international landscape. The first decade saw BRICS cooperation getting off the ground and bearing rich fruit. Our 5 BRICS countries, guided by the BRICS spirit of openness, inclusiveness, and women cooperation, have deepened our collaboration, enhanced our solidarity and mutual trust, improved the lives of our peoples, and made our bond of interest and friendship even closer. It is fair to say that our cooperation has contributed much to the global economic recovery and growth. Today, we are witnessing major changes unfolding in our world, something unseen in a century. For us emerging markets and developing countries, this is a world of both opportunities and challenges. We should put the pursuit of BRICS cooperation in the historical process of global transformation, and we should put the development of our own countries in the historical course of promoting common development of BRICS countries and other countries in the world, thus making new advances in the next golden decade. The next decade will be a crucial one in which new global growth drivers will take the place of old ones. A new round of revolution and transformation in science, technology, and industries, featuring artificial intelligence, big data, quantum information, and biotechnology, are gaining momentum. They are giving birth to a large number of new industries and business forums and models, and they will fundamentally change global development and people's work and lives. We must seize this important opportunity to enable emerging markets and developing countries to achieve leapfrog development. The next decade will see faster changes in the international landscape and the international alignment of forces. Emerging markets and developing countries already contribute 80% of global economic growth. Based on exchange rate calculation, these countries account for nearly 40% of the global economic output. Growing at the current rate, these countries will see their economic output approach half of the global total in a decade. The collective rise of emerging markets and developing countries is unstoppable and will make global development more balanced, and it will make global peace more firmly based. The next decade will see a profound reshaping of the global governance system. The world is moving toward multipolarity and greater economic globalization amid setbacks. Geopolitical hotspots keep emerging, and the dark shadow of terrorism and armed conflict still haunts us. Unilateralism and protectionism are mounting, dealing a severe blow to multilateralism and the multilateral trading regime. We are facing a choice between cooperation and confrontation, between opening up and closed-door policy, and between mutual benefit and a beggar-thy-neighbor approach. The international community has again reached a new crossroads. The evolution of global governance system will have a profound impact on the development of all countries, particularly emerging markets and developing countries, and indeed on the prosperity and stability of the whole world. We BRICS countries should keep abreast of the historical trend, seize development opportunities, jointly meet challenges, and play a constructive role in building a new type of international relations and a community with a shared future for mankind. First, we should pursue win-win cooperation to build an open economy. Openness and cooperation, they are the sure way to achieve progress in science and technology and growth of productivity. A trade war should be rejected because there will be no winner. Economic hegemony is even more objectionable because it will undermine the collective interest of the international community. Those who pursue this course will only end up hurting themselves.
As the world economy is going through profound transition and changes, only by opening themselves can different countries achieve mutual benefit, share prosperity, and sustainable development. This should be the right choice for all countries. We BRICS countries should firmly promote an open global economy. We should be resolute in rejecting unilateralism and protectionism, promote trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, and jointly steer the global economy toward greater openness, greater inclusiveness, balanced growth, and win-win outcomes for all. We should ensure that economic glglobalization would deliver more benefits. We should help emerging markets and developing countries, African countries, and the least developed countries in particular, to fully involve themselves in international division of labor and share in the benefits of globalization. Second, we should pursue innovation and seize development opportunities. Science and technology are the primary production forces, and they have provided inexhaustible power, driving the progress of human civilization. Humanity has made giant leaps forward as it progressed from an agricultural civilization to an industrial civilization, a process which created both huge gains in social productivity and growing pains. The world today has once again reached a critical historic juncture. In the unfolding new round of scientific and technological revolution and industrial transformation, new things will inevitably emerge and take the place of old ones. Indeed, this will be a difficult and painful process. But if countries succeed in seizing opportunities that have presented themselves, they will be able to achieve new dynamic growth and deliver better lives to the people. In the face of new opportunities brought by new science and technology, every country has an equal right to development. Those who fail to keep abreast of the trend of the times will fall behind and become irrelevant. What we can and should do is to seize opportunities, increase input in innovation, focus on new areas of growth, and replace old drivers with new ones. We should endeavor to advance structural reform, remove all institutional barriers to innovation, and fully unlock innovation potential and energize the market. We should develop a global perspective, boost international exchanges and cooperation in innovation, fully leverage each other's comparative strengths and resource endowment so as to enable more countries and people to benefit from scientific and technological advances. At the same time, we should ease the impact of application of information technology, automation, and smart technology on traditional industries. And we should create new job opportunities in the process of fostering new industries. Third, we should pursue inclusive growth to deliver benefits to people of all countries. Uneven and insufficient development is a common challenge facing all countries. There is a gap between developed countries and emerging markets and developing countries, i.e. the North-South gap remains huge, and there are also development gaps of varying degrees within countries. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a comprehensive action plan for the international community. We BRICS countries should
basing ourselves on our actual national conditions, follow the guidance of the 2030 Agenda as we pursue our own development strategies. We should put people first, ensure coordinated economic and social development, and protect the environment, thus giving our people a stronger sense of fulfillment and happiness. We should ensure harmony between man and nature and encourage the international community to fully implement the Paris Agreement. We should treat nature with awe and do more to foster an ecological system conducive to green development. It is necessary to promote international development cooperation, urge developed countries to fulfill their promises on official development assistance, and urge them to increase support to developing countries. Africa is home to more developing countries than any other continent, and Africa has more development potential than any other region in the world. We should strengthen cooperation with Africa, support its development, and make BRICS Africa cooperation a model for South-South cooperation. We should actively carry out cooperation with African countries in such areas as poverty reduction, food security, innovation, infrastructure development, and industrialization in a way compatible with their national conditions. We should help African countries develop their economic structure, contribute to the implementation of Agenda 2063 of the African Union, and thus enable Africa, an ancient continent, to gain strong vitality.
Fourth, we should uphold multilateralism and improve global governance. An enabling and stable external environment is crucial for the development of all countries, especially emerging markets and developing countries. Obviously, the current international order is not a perfect one. But as long as it is rule-based, aims to be equitable, and pursues win-win outcomes as its goal, such an international order should not be discarded as one pleases, still less should it be dismantled and restructured. We BRICS countries must uphold multilateralism. We should urge all parties to fully observe collectively adopted international rules, and we should treat all countries as equals, regardless of their size, address issues that matter to all through consultation, and oppose hegemony and power politics. We should promote common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, get actively involved in mediation efforts for resolving geopolitical hotspot issues. It is important for us to firmly support the multilateral trading regime, advance global economic governance reform, and increase the representation and voice of emerging markets and developing countries. When new rules are made on such issues as innovation, trade and investment, and intellectual property protection, or on new frontiers, including cyberspace, outer space, or the polar regions, we should make sure that the views of emerging markets and developing countries are heeded, their interests and demands are taken into consideration, and there are sufficient opportunities for their development. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, this year marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up. Success only comes through hard work. During the past 40 years, China has come a long way. With strenuous efforts, China has blazed the path of building socialism with distinctive Chinese features. Proceeding from China's realities and developing a global vision, we in China have both drawn strength from the wisdom of the time-honored Chinese civilization and learned from other countries, both East and West. We have embraced the world and integrated our country fully into it. While pursuing its own development, China has made its own important contribution to peace and development of mankind. As the world's biggest developing country, China will ride the trend of the times and pursue innovation-driven, coordinated, green and open development for all. We will step up efforts to pursue innovation-driven development and fully engage in international cooperation on innovation and technologies. We will take an active part in South-South cooperation to foster greater opportunities for common development of emerging markets and developing countries. China will continue to develop itself with its door wide open. At the annual conference of the Boao Forum for Asia, held last April, I announced a number of new initiatives to open China further, and these initiatives are being speedily pursued. China will build a more investment-friendly environment that is aligned with international standards, more transparent and law-based, and encourages competition and opposes monopoly. China will take tough law enforcement steps to strengthen protection of intellectual property rights, to make infringements even more costly. We encourage companies to maintain normal technological exchanges and will see to it that their lawful intellectual property rights are protected. China will also increase imports to promote balance of payment on the current account. China will host the first China International Import Expo in Shanghai this November, a major move to firmly support trade liberalization and open its market. The expo will serve as a new platform for the world to access the Chinese market. By now, over 130 countries and regions and more than 2,800 companies have confirmed participation, and over 150,000 buyers in and outside China are expected to attend this fair. I welcome business leaders from other BRICS and African countries to attend the expo. China will continue to vigorously pursue the Belt and Road Initiative to create new opportunities of social and economic development for participating countries and for them to implement the UN 2030 agenda. The Belt and Road Initiative, guided by the principle of seeking shared benefits through extensive consultation and joint contribution, originated in China but belongs to the world. It is our sincere hope that other BRICS countries, African countries, and other emerging markets and developing countries will forge strong partnerships with this initiative so that its benefits will reach more countries and their peoples. China and African countries are destined to be good friends, good brothers and good partners. And China-Africa cooperation stands as a fine example of South-South cooperation. This coming September will see a reunion of China and African countries at the summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing. Themed on China and Africa toward an even stronger community with a shared future through win-win cooperation, the Beijing summit aims to enhance complementarity between China-Africa joint efforts to pursue the Belt and Road Initiative, the 2030 Agenda and the 2063 Agenda on the one hand, and the development strategies of African countries on the other. This will enable China and Africa to pursue high-quality and high-standard cooperation for mutual benefit and common development. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, business cooperation is the most important and fruitful aspect of BRICS cooperation. Thanks to our joint efforts, new advances have been made in this cooperation this year. We BRICS countries will forge a partnership on the new industrial revolution, which involves more coordination of macroeconomic policies, closer cooperation on innovation and industrialization, and joint efforts to accelerate economic upgrading and the replacement of growth drivers. Our 5 BRICS countries have also made good progress in cooperation on trade facilitation, service trade, e-commerce, intellectual property rights, and in other fields. These steps will enable us to seize opportunities and meet challenges in a changing world and enrich the BRICS economic partnership strategy. The business community is the mainstay of BRICS economic cooperation and a dynamic force driving it. As business leaders, you have a great role to play in shaping the second golden decade of BRICS cooperation. I hope that you will fully leverage your strengths to enhance win-win cooperation for common development between our 5 countries. As business leaders, you should take bold steps to explore new ground in pursuing reform and innovation, and working together, you can surely open up new horizons for the development of our 5 countries and other emerging markets and developing countries. I also hope you will keep in mind the needs of the people and pursue both economic and social returns so as to increase public support for BRICS cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, this year marks the centenary of the birth of Nelson Mandela. Let me quote one of his famous sayings. After climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. Indeed, the history of BRICS cooperation is a journey of our 5 countries climbing great hills only to reach new heights. I am convinced that when our 5 countries forge ahead together, we will scale new peaks, reach new heights, and we will be able to make even greater contribution to peace and development of mankind. Thank you.
Chinese President Xi Jinping outlining his vision of a second, what he called, golden decade of BRICS cooperation. He discussed optimistic decade of changes and growth and urged the members to promote a global economy that will grow closer and embrace new technologies. Let's now get live to our correspondent Rama Yang, who's standing by for us live in Johannesburg. So Rama, give us the highlights from your perspective of President Xi's speech.
Right, then the speech, of course, focusing very heavily on trade issues. Both he and his host here in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, both focusing very strongly on the issue of trade. We are essentially, they warned, moving away from the existing multilateral system into an environment in which unilateralism is pretty much the status quo. They did warn that this begar thy neighbor policy will essentially be to the disadvantage of everyone involved. What was interesting, though, was the proposals that he put forward. China will expand its imports. That was extremely important, especially for a lot of African countries that do export a lot of raw commodities, as it were, towards the Chinese market. The question, of course, is what sort of specific measures are they going to see in that respect? Are we looking at an increase in quotas? Are we looking at a reduction in tariffs? Those are the finer details that we'll certainly be looking forward to. But this, of course, was a speech that very much focused on trade issues. At no point was he the United States or the US President Donald Trump mentioned by name, but very much the emphasis here is that, look, we need to be more open, we need more trade, we need more investment, and this whole begar thy neighbor approach to economic policy simply doesn't work, and it's not in the interest of any of the economies around the world.
And the president did mention the trade war and its impact on global economies. So Rama, I also want to get your thoughts on the fact that President Xi mentioned the BRICS Africa cooperation and how that needs to be boosted. Why is that so important to the continent?
Well, if you look at trade patterns for a lot of African economies, that really is the answer. If you look at South Africa, for instance, a lot of its trade is essentially with the southern end of the continent. It's literally the anchor of the Southern African Development Community. If South Africa, to put it in very simple terms, if South Africa gets a cold, the rest of the region gets a very nasty bout of pneumonia. You look at places like Kenya, for example, India and China are pretty much right in the top 2, top 3 sources of its imports. A lot of the refined fuel consumed in Kenya comes directly from refineries in India. If there's a problem with the Indian economy, if there's a slowdown in the Chinese economy, it directly affects these two economies on the African continent. Flip it from the other perspective. If you're a supplier of commodities, right, into, say, India or China, and you get affected by this trade war business, and if you look at the prices of iron ore and copper right now, they're all down by about 10 to 16%. That basically means your revenues essentially have fallen by a comparable margin. So it is extremely important that the trade links between China, India and the African continent as a whole are pretty strong. But in the long run, there is a recognition here that this trade relationship will not essentially grow if you have one side just shipping off commodities to one end and then buying finished goods from the other. That has to change, which is why this speech is here focused so strongly on the need to essentially develop more skills across the continent. And one of the interesting things that of course came out in President Xi's speech was when he mentioned that, look, yes, we know there are a lot of technological changes coming through with things like machine learning, a lot more automation coming into the market across a broad range of sectors. These transitions will be painful, he says, but they do represent a significant opportunity. Governments also need to invest in the industries that will essentially be hardest hit by these changes in tech to essentially make that transition, especially for the labor side of it, to make that transition a lot easier, more productive for everyone in general.
Yeah, painful changes, but as President Xi says, absolutely necessary to embrace this new golden era. Okay, Ramon Young, live for us in Johannesburg. Thank you so much. Well, at that business forum, President Xi called for emerging countries to play a constructive role in addressing the common challenges. Listen in.
We BRICS countries should keep abreast of the historical trend, seize development opportunities, jointly meet challenges, and play a constructive role in building a new type of international relations and a community with a shared future for mankind.
President Xi encouraging more cooperation among the BRICS members and also among countries all over the world. Let's turn now back to our two guests in the studio, Victor Gal and Evandro Carvalho. Thank you both for staying with us. We appreciate it. So, Evandro, let me get your thoughts. What were you most struck by President Xi's speech?
First, I think he keeps the original spirit of BRICS, that is focused on the reform of the global governance. I think this is the main characteristics of the BRICS initiative. They claim to reform the international organizations, especially World Bank, IMF, and also United Nations. In this case is acclaimed by Brazil and India especially. This is the first point. Second, his commitment with the South-South cooperation. This is another aspect very important for BRICS initiatives that differentiate BRICS from other kind of political and economic platform that exists in the world, for example, like G20. This is important. And I noticed a very interesting aspect when he mentioned, to build the community of shared future for mankind, and he was the public present applauded him. And this is very interesting because this thought and this concept is, there are some difference when we think about, for example, globalization. That was a very important concept in 19 decades, but the globalization is a concept that is connected with the idea of uniformization. And the community of shared future for mankind is a concept that respects the differences, respect the diversity, and that this is a very important aspect and feature of BRICS initiative.
And so, Victor, what do you think was the big headline from your perspective?
Well, first of all, if I were in the audience in Johannesburg listening to President Xi Jinping, I would think he spoke as a philosopher, as a teacher, as a great statesman, as a friend, as a partner, as a global trader, as a free trader, as a champion of globalization. So I think he definitely has many points which would have already impressed the audience in the hall, but also the global audience. And he set out the difference between what the BRICS countries should stand for more globalization and free trade and cooperation and inclusive development, versus what the other side, and everyone knows who he was referring to, wanted to do. That is to put itself above the rest of the world, unilateralism, anti-globalization, building up walls of barriers, for example. And I think he also talked about the 10 golden years of the BRICS countries, but also he emphasized that in another 10 years, the emerging markets all combined would account for 50% of the global economy. And he said this is irreversible. This is a megatrend. Nobody can stop, nobody can reverse. And I think countries like the United States need to listen very carefully, because you can really not fight against the megatrend. You cannot really fight against the major changes that are unfolding in the world. One single country cannot stop the train of the world development. And I think President Xi Jinping really put that in very clear terms. And I think this really cheered the BRICS countries, because some of them are experiencing difficulties. But we need to really look at the bright future after we have the chance of cooperation and pursue inclusive development. He also talked about what China can do, and also he welcomed the BRICS countries and all the African countries to attend the China Import Expo, which will happen later this year.
Yes, so back to this point, though, of trying to be more inclusive here. We did hear this in President Xi's speech, and it's a concern we hear elsewhere, is that perhaps BRICS net is not wide enough, that it could open itself up to other developing countries, other emerging economies. Ivandro, what do you think could be done in regards to, first off, do you think that's necessary, and if so, why?
I think it is. And the most important aspect to consider is emerging markets. They will play an important role in the next decades. There are a lot of reports published by World Bank that shows this. And that's why I think it makes sense when we talk about the BRICS Plus concept, also a proposal made by the Chinese government last year in this former summit. And but the most interesting aspect is this, the idea of the BRICS Plus is to enlarge the platform for other emerging markets, other developing countries, not developed countries. So that's why this is totally related to the idea of strengthen the South-South cooperation. And that's why I think the BRICS Plus concept is an important initiative, but it's also important to keep the original spirit, I mean, the idea of reform the global governance. If they keep this idea, I think they keep the main spirit of the BRICS
But is
initiative.
that a realistic goal here? I mean, based on what we've seen in the past and how the future looks, do you think that this really could be a moment of big change for BRICS?
Yes, they get some kind of reforms within the IMF, of course, very not so high reform, but I think this is important, because what happened, the international organizations created during the 20th century, all of them, or the majority of them, are facing crises of legitimacy and efficacy. If we look at, for example, WTO, the Doha round started in 2001 and didn't finish yet. If you look at, for example, United Nations, there are a lot of questions about, the role played by the United Nations, even European Union with the Brexit. So we have a lot of problems with the international organizations created during the 20th century. And when the president, when the Chinese government, for example, recently published the white paper for WTO and affirmed the commitment of the China with WTO, it was an important step. So despite China and in other countries, for BRICS countries, they are involved in many other new initiatives in this 21st century, like AIIB, NDB, Belt and Road. They are still committed to the international organizations created during the 20th century. And I think this is a very important aspect to be considered.
Well, without question, interesting moment here for this organization. Okay, thank you both for your time today.
Thank you.
Well, at the BRICS Business Forum, Chinese President Xi Jinping pointed out the strength of the world's emerging economies.
The next decade will see faster changes in the international landscape and the international alignment of forces. Emerging markets and developing countries already contribute 80% of global economic growth. Based on exchange rate calculation, these countries account for nearly 40% of the global economic output. Growing at the current rates, these countries will see their economic output approach half of the global total in a decade. The collective rise of emerging markets and developing countries is unstoppable.
Unstoppable in President Xi's words, so let's get back to our guests to talk about that. So, Victor, we hear about this concern of trying to bring in the least developed countries, emerging economies. What does that actually look like, though, when we talk about trying to include them here into this organization? Realistically, what does that mean?
Now, I think President Xi Jinping rightfully pointed out that every country has the right to develop. No country has the right to stop or deprive other countries' right to development, and all the countries should really be equal and be treated as equal. And I think this is very important. This is exactly what the 5 BRICS countries framework should stand for. That is, everyone can work with others as equal, everyone can pitch in, everyone can cooperate, not only for its own benefit, which in itself is important, but also for the collective good. And I think this, again, is in sharp contrast with some other countries in the world. And I think President Xi Jinping basically said China is promoting this idea. Hopefully the 5 BRICS countries will together promote this idea, and especially when the emerging economies in the world in 10 years' time will combine together, account for about half of the global economy. That will be a good moment for the emerging economies as a whole.
Right, but how do you push that idea forward? How do you actually make it something that impacts people on the ground?
First of all, from the Chinese perspective, China need to do the right thing. China need to do the right thing at home, but also China need to do the right thing on the global stage. And China should definitely avoid this big guy mentality, try to impose its value system onto the others. China can be a teacher, for example, but also can be a good student in sharing its own experiences and lessons with the other 5 BRICS countries and with other emerging markets, and also with the developed countries, and also keep opening the door wider and wider and welcome other countries, as President Xi Jinping said on other occasions, to have a free ride on China's development, which is better for all of us. Eventually.
So, Evangel, let me get your thoughts on that, especially from your perspective as a person who studies Brazil. What do you think is China's role here in BRICS and in this movement?
Once China still has a strong economy, China naturally is invited to play an important role in this field. This is a first aspect. The second aspect, the Chinese foreign policy, as I mentioned before, is very active. So they create and promote many other initiatives, international organizations, platforms, funds. So there are a lot of initiatives that can be connected as well with some other BRICS initiatives specifically. But I think I think it's important to highlight one aspect. It's important to go beyond the discourse. So when we see this trade war, for example, and China, on the other hand, promote the Shanghai International Import-Export. China is sending a message that China wants to buy goods and services. So China will import more. And this is a very clear message, that China is committed to promote the international trade. So that's why I think China, in this way, we have to admit, has a role of leadership within BRICS.
But it's not just importing goods. China also invests a lot of money into these countries, billions and billions of dollars, and there is concern that it may not pay off for China. What do you think? Yeah, you are right. I think China has to concern about this. There are a lot of Chinese investments in Brazil, South Africa, Russia, but this brings to me important another reflection that I think it's a message is important to send to Brazil and South Africa. The B and S, these two letters in the march of in the beginning or in the end of the BRICS, they have now to think how they can be more active. Not how
only,
they can step up.
Exactly. I think this is important, especially because now is in South Africa, the summit, and next year will be in Brazil.
It's an interesting conversation. Again, thank you both for your time today.
Thank you.
And you are watching continuous coverage of the BRICS Business Forum here on CGTN. Stay with us.